Thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to Sydney branch webinar, which is on entitlement framework with Nur Oyman. So before we start the webinar, it is important to acknowledge that we are physically on the traditional lands of the Aboriginal people. We would like to pay our respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. The same respect is extended to all Indigenous people who are watching from around the world. So the Dharma webinar will be recorded. And if you do not wish to be recorded, please ensure that your video and sound remains off. For the members, it will also be available, the presentation will be also available on our website. And the webinar will also be there on YouTube. For those of you who have questions related to the presentation, please type in your questions in the Q&A tab in Zoom, and then we can prioritize and we can filter and escalate the questions to Nur. Today, we are going to look at various data entitlement considerations: the jurisdiction, data sovereignty, the ability to trace an entitlement policy to a regulation, a lot of different things. We will learn about how long, organizational data be held in storage, who can access stored data, should the data held in storage be managed in a particular manner. So, that's the topic of the meeting. And now I'm going to introduce you to a wonderful speaker, Nur Oyman. Nur is a principal consultant of Oyman Consulting. She has an IT executive background with more than 25 years of experience in leading large-scale IT change programs to address business problems and to enable business strategies, particularly in the financial services. Her expertise is also in high-level strategy and architecture, and that sees her leading, large, which is greater than 200, I think, diverse solution delivery teams, both onshore as well as offshore, in end-to-end implementations of programs, and in both agile and full traditional waterfall delivery methodologies. Without much ado, over to Nur.
Okay. Thanks, Warren. And good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining me for our webinar this evening. I hope the data entitlement management or framework is as exciting for everyone as it's exciting for me. I just want to start with first, what is the problem? Actually, entitlement management or entitlement framework started within the large organizations, especially financial services organizations, long ago, but we didn't call this one entitlement management, and the pressures were more coming from the inside of the organization. The problem was more around data sharing. That data sharing concept actually also surfaced within the organizations while the data analytics and opportunities coming up with the data became prominent. Because within the organizations, then sometimes the Chinese walls stopped subsidiaries to access each other's information. Sometimes, basically, it was more territorial. A prime example on this one is within the financial services organization can be the wealth management or insurance arm didn't want to share its customer information with the banking arm, or even within the banking world, the private bank didn't want to share its information with the retail banking. But on top of that, we also try to answer those issues through the projects rather than looking at the entitlements or sharing concept end to end. This wasn't also enough. Again, with the internal or external pressures, we also needed to make decisions about when to mask, when to encrypt, where we should place the information, depending on the classification, how critical, how important data is. On top of that, then the external pressures kicked on, basically regulations and legislations. They gave us certain restrictions, and they also put some pressure around how to look at our data with a bit of traceability, meaning that which policy is related to what sort of principles or conditions or directives, and what is the consequences of that. So this presentation is just looking at the entitlement management end to end, and how we should just approach that new or upcoming information management capability to help us to resolve this issue, as well as to help us to deliver even faster and cheaper. I'm on slide 3. I'd just like to, first of all, to call it out where we can place the information entitlement management within the information management framework. This presentation or representation of the framework is changing from organization to organization. This is the one I like most, and definitely based on the MBOK and MIC2 frameworks, and it's been changed or modified a little bit depending on how you look at the information management framework. And as far as I'm concerned, the entitlement management can go hand to hand with the information classification. And this is where our focus area, so that's the reason I put the entitlement management within the information classification. However, in your organization or how you look at it, you can also place it together or just call it out on its own right, entitlement management as an upcoming capability. One close contact is actually metadata management. It can be placed within the metadata management as well. When we just want to discuss the key entitlement, we want to discuss the entitlement, we need to first discuss the entitlement concepts. I'm on slide 4, as you can see. Very first thing we need to call it out is the definition of an actor. Actor is a person or an organization or an application or a system which you are giving entitlement to. So within the organization, once you define your 3 subtypes of actor, then you basically need to ask questions about who should be allowed to access data in organization B, data to organization A. This is basically your subsidiaries or the organizations you might be partnering to, or whether the organization B can access the data for, process the data for marketing purposes. So this is also one sort of entitlement question. And when it comes to the application or system, you might be also talking about application B accessing to application A data, or application B allowed to access certain business objects within the other application, or whether the application can be stored they can store the data without any encryption. So these are basically the concepts the entitlement answers to. As well as it can be at the person level. You can just discuss application, whether the actor, person, when I say person, exactly I mean the role. Update information in application B, or can person A grant access to person B for a certain business object? All these questions are within the key entitlement framework. And if you look at the entitlement management end-to-end view, at the very top, we need to first identify what is our goal. Our goal is establishing a comprehensive and repeatable entitlement management process. As I mentioned previously, because entitlement management under different names or maybe even under the entitlement was or still being handled within the organizations a little bit haphazardly. So it just comes up sometimes as a result of a certain project program of work, or sometimes comes up when one party doesn't want to share their information with another party, or sometimes also comes up with when some information is abused and not used in the right way or the one intended way. So our aim is to make this one comprehensive and repeatable management process. And within that one, we just want to make sure that data access and processing rights are well defined. You know the data owners, when and how to share data, and also know the processing purpose of data. The next one is the data storage. You also need to prescribe how physical data can be stored. This one is not only the premise type, geolocation, and also the storage medium. The last but not least, then by using the entitlement outputs, you need to facilitate the IT solutions by giving the resources the access at the right time and for the right reasons. So this is sort of the end-to-end view, and entitlement framework and associated operating model helps us to define the overall process, its execution, and the governance. So this is, in a nutshell, what the entitlement management process is. Okay, the next one is also we need to talk about, we are doing this whole work and program of work, we are talking about what are the benefits. Actually, we can classify the tangible benefits under 5 main titles. The very first one is provides a common language and taxonomy, because you really need to define your business objects. You not only defining the business objects, but also you need to define the metadata surrounding those business objects. So that's why it brings the common language and taxonomy. And also you need to define your governance terms properly. We will talk about this one in the following slides. And it also improves the quality of data, because you not only you have the owners, you need to define or classify your data and also define the descriptions. And based on that, you might also need to define, it takes you to improve the quality of your data. The second one is it brings a systematic approach to entitlement management. As I mentioned, it doesn't the starting point is not the project. Starting point is just looking at the legislation, regulations, and your internal contracts or policies, etc., and then bringing down your entitlements to in the low level. So it introduces overall systematic approach. Third one is facilitates the executive level communication. This is actually quite an important one, because I've been to quite a number of meetings at the executive levels, and the discussions were really never ending. And because it wasn't attaching the discussions or stemming from the policies, the discussions were just going to all directions, and mostly it was the worries or concerns were territorial or unfounded. So establishes the clear rights definitely stemmed from the policies. So that's also an important aspect. The fourth tangible benefit is increases the speed of delivery and save costs. The reason for that one, once you look at your entitlement management end-to-end, and then you create the rule set, when the project comes up, your solution architects have clear guidelines how to design, and there is also an agreed rule sets by business, which also you can just take it to all the way to the policies. So definitely it increases speed of delivery and save costs by shortening the design time, and also in some respects by automating some entitlement processes to the execution level. For sure, avoids potential regulatory fines, because you will be able to answer the regulatory bodies how you're just looking after and how you're giving your entitlements to your certain actors. The last but not least, ensures the regulatory compliance. Again, this is from the fines perspective is quite important, and also reputational damage perspective is quite important, and it safeguards your data from unauthorized access. So these are the basically the major tangible benefits of entitlement management. Okay, and what are the tangible outcomes? There are some outcomes, basically it can be used for multiple purposes, but these are can be classified under 7 major outcomes. Information ownership rights. You will know who owns which data. You know the data owners, business functions associated with those data owners. So you have a clear, agreed information ownership rights. You will know your legal and non-legal mandates. The importance of this one, because those legal mandates will be refrained from the legal jargon. You really understand that once you refrain the legal jargon, what is the impact in my data space, what it mandates in my data space. And the next one is rationalized data domain policies. This is also quite important because based on my experience within Australia and outside of Australia, mainly in Europe, you find out that actually in organizations, you might find multiple data related policies and you need to rationalize them before you progress with any program of work in entitlement. And I will talk about this one also a little bit more. And the next one is basically having a verified and domain standard and guidelines. The importance of that, when we say linked, those guidelines and standards will be linked back to the policies. This is where the importance of having a rationalized data domain policies. We also have, we will have the duties and responsibilities and usage rights. You will have the full entitlement usage rights of the actors, especially the roles. So this is also quite important from the regulatory perspective, as well as not only regulatory perspective, from the organization perspective as well. The next one is data storage prescriptions and rules. This is basically just giving you around what sort of information or which business objects you can just hold in which area, whether geographically or from the database management system perspective. The last but not least is as a result of entitlement management, you will also have a good understanding of what are the common and universal rights or at the group level, which doesn't require much restriction and it's a public knowledge or within the organization can be accessed freely. So these are basically the tangible outcomes. This is our starting point, entitlement landscape. Before you start your program of work in entitlement management, you need to call it out. What is your entitlement landscape? The first row you see is the actor. We had some discussions prior to this slide about the actors, but mainly you have 3 subgroups as you define as an actor: organization, system or application, or person. When we say person, we're basically talking about a role actually. Within the organization, you might have a group organization, you might have your subsidiaries, you just want to call it out by name here, that's why it's called A, B, etc. Within the system, usually the subtyping is the system of record, system of engagement, or system of reference. And within the person, again, it depends on your organization. You might decide that you will only have employees and customers as person or just employees because maybe you are self-sufficient, you don't need service providers. But also you might be an organization like insurance that you need to add also service partners into your subclassification. But the important thing is you need to give entitlement based on those classification. It means within your organization, whatever it's important, you need to call out in this landscape. Then this major 5 givings, regulatory legal entitlements, conditions and types of entitlement, or processing right, or access right, or storage and local conditions. If you just look at the right-hand side, you need to decide which ones are important, and it will make a difference when you make a call about an entitlement and when you need to decode. So you can use this one as a starting point, but you definitely need to adjust based on your organization's needs. We call this one sometimes also entitlement reference architecture. And again, it changes from organization to organization. For sure, entitlement management, like in any other capability, is not an island. It has certain interaction points with other IT capabilities. There are mainly 6 IT capabilities listed here. The first capability or first interaction point is actually business objects. I'm pretty sure you are aware of what business objects are, but just as a reminder, is a logical cluster of entities and attributes related to the same business entity. And we know that business objects represent the object view of related business concepts, and you really need to define the business objects within your organization. You also need to decide the labeling of business objects within the organizations, how far you need to go down, not global business objects, local business objects, or whatever the naming or labeling you like to do, based on your business functions and how your organization is structured. That might change, but also you need to attach those business objects to the data owners, as well as you need to map those business objects to your applications. That's why the business objects actually are the cornerstone for entitlement management process. This interaction is a very important interaction for entitlement management, because business objects basically playing a fundamental role here. The next one is definitely data classification. Data classification, organizing your data or classifying your data in a most effective, efficient way and secure one. This data classification basically is from the security perspective, meaning strictly confidential, etc. classification, but also you might need to do some further classification, like the companies in Europe under the GDPR rules, they have to further classify their data as personal identifiable or sensitive information, etc. So you also have to map your data items within the business objects to certain classification. You need to know how your data is classified. That mapping is also important for entitlement management. The next interaction point is rules engine. If you have a rules engine in your organization, you really need to be able to execute the rules coming from entitlement management in the rules engine. There might be some technical rules you might need to execute within the rules engine. So that's why there is an interaction point with the rules engine. With the next, also the identity and access management is once you create the entitlement profiles, which we will talk about in next slides, you should be able to encode them as information and access management scripts and be able to execute. So there is also an interaction point between entitlement management or entitlement profiles and the IAM. IT security, the interaction is that IT security needs to know who has access to what application and who has access to classified information. So there's always an interaction between IT security and entitlement management process. And the next one, and actually is the last one, is metadata management or the corporate metadata repository. Metadata repository is actually, like the business objects, is the cornerstone capability or interaction point for entitlement management, because it not the business objects, access logs, and metadata information, but it also expectation is to hold the network or visualize the network diagram of each participating actor and what objects and applications they are entitled to. So basically the metadata repository is the place you visualize and also keep all this information within the repository. It's a critical sort of interaction point for the success of entitlement management. When we just look at the overall entitlement management, oh, sorry, I think, okay. We need to set the entitlement management capability before we just get into the entitlement management linked to our lifecycle management, meaning change lifecycle management. There are certain activities you have to do before you just get into the incremental life cycle of entitlement management. The very first one is coming up with a comprehensive entitlement target operating model. High level, you need to end-to-end with the cooperation of business and IT together, you need to come up with this operating model. The next first activity you need to do is developing an entitlement reference architecture. This is what we discussed a couple of slides ago, and decide what parameters are important for your organization, and you will make decisions about entitlement. Then you need to define the process flows. This is not a news, I assume, and develop the governance framework. Actually, we will talk about the stakeholders later on, but having a governance framework is really important, and also data governance functions participation to entitlement management is a sort of the paramount to the success of the program of work. The next item is, or next activity is basically catalog the legislation, policies and legal contracts to identify the overlaps, gaps, and contradictions. This is one of the most important activity. As I mentioned, based on my experience in organizations, there are lots of policies around, and there are even quite a number of policies around data. There are descriptions of some contracts or strategy, but they are not sort of rationalized and put together to understand if there are any gaps, contradictions, or overlaps. You need to do this because without this, you will not be able to have that traceability. Once you did that rationalization, then you need to look at your data principles, standards, and guidelines, and you either need to develop them further, or you might not. You might need to refine them based on those rationalized policies. So this is also quite an important activity. Then the next step is definitely developing an entitlement rule set. It is just a matrix of codified entitlement rule set. Once you define that rule set, then the next one is developing a root entitlement profiles for primary actors. We will discuss the root entitlement, what does it mean, and primary actor concepts, but this is also one of the foundational activity. The next activity is the actually a pilot. You have to play back and validate your framework. And you have to do this one with the valid and current use cases. So this is the pilot is the most essential because for the success of the setting the entitlement management capability within your organization. For sure, then you need to document your processes and the artifacts, and you need to, the last stage is you need to incorporate your entitlement management into the organization's change lifecycle process, lifecycle process. So this is the end-to-end comprehensive entitlement management before you set the process within the organization.
Noor, one quick thing.
Yeah.
Would you like to answer the questions as we go or at the end?
I prefer at the end, but if there's an urgent question, I don't mind to answer now.
No, there's no urgent question.
Okay.
We can discuss it later.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Because I'm just worried that I might just lose the track of my time, so that's why. But if I cannot answer during the call, during the webinar, I'll also try to answer offline. Okay. Entitlement management stakeholder map. Actually, if you look at the interest versus influence quadrants, if you can easily see that the data governance function is the most important function from the entitlement management perspective. I call it data governance forum, but you might have different names for your within your organizations, but the data governance body, maybe we should say, and the legal office are the most important functions for the entitlement management, and they need to be managed most thoroughly. Actually, I wouldn't say manage. The data governance function needs to run the entitlement management program of work together with the enterprise architects. So that is not an oversight role, is actually has a data governance representatives have a big stake in this entitlement management program. If you go to the left-hand side, the technology, for sure, our dear enterprise information architects, solution data architects, and solution delivery team leads are quite important for this one, and they have to be completely informed. Again, actually, enterprise information architects are part of the program of work, and they have to work side by side with the data governance representatives to execute the entitlement management program. If you just look at the right bottom corner, the process lifecycle is also an important function. In this case, the project managers, SCIC process owners, as well as, not the project managers, apologies, program management and SCIC process owners, and project and program managers and directors are quite important for the success of entitlement management. The most important part here is we need to anticipate and meet their needs. If you bring another like entitlement management parameter into the solution delivery or program management space, you have to make sure that it is for their benefit. It speeds up the process. It just removes the complexity. And that's also one of the reasons we're saying that the pilot program is essential. Because every new parameter for the project managers or program managers, directors, means that another complexity, another point they need to take into consideration during the delivery. Left bottom corner is information security. Definitely we need to keep them informed. But the regular minimal contact is fine, but they need to be aware of what we are doing and be able to provide feedback where and when required. Entitlement management stakeholder from the responsibilities perspective actually is also quite important. If you look at from the responsibility perspective, there's a nice flow. If you look at the bottom of the slide, you can see we have the entitlement management operating life cycle, which can be divided into an evaluation phase and design phase. Once you finish this life cycle, then your solution delivery life cycle start. Actually, this left-hand side is basically once you established your entitlement management process, then there might be changes to the regulations, or there might be a new internal contract or some new strategy, IT strategy impacting your entitlement environment, then you will have this incremental small entitlement management lifecycle, which will be also an input to the solution delivery lifecycle. If we just go through this one quickly, you will have legal office looking at the regulations and identifying the relevant sections to the stakeholders, then explain the legal connotations to the relevance or connotations of relevant sections, getting rid of the legal jargon, making sure that it is succinct and understandable by the lame person. Then the data governance forum looks at those outcome of the legal office, then they encode and update the relevant sections of the data policies, or they might just not need to update anything depending on what the change is. And they have to also describe the practical connotations. Then that input goes to the enterprise architects, then they review the policies and they encode them into the data principles, and they also outline the applicable conditions. From there on, that information goes to our information architects. They review the relevant data principles and they encode them into a design time rule set or runtime rule set, and they also generate the profiles for primary actors. Design time and runtime rule set concept just sort of surfaces itself here. Design time rule set can be that the information around where you can locate the data, whether on cloud or on premise. This is a design time rule set if the rule set gives you that direction. Runtime rule set might be for an actor rights to access certain data. That's a runtime rule set, because that access right, giving that access might be the script to be executed during the build phase of the solution delivery lifecycle. So from there on, then we are getting into the solution delivery lifecycle. We call it at the bottom design time and runtime. These are not reflective of SDLC lifecycle. It is more looking at from the basically entitlement management perspective. And solution architects takes the design time guidelines and then they shape the project. They also provide technical architects the runtime rule sets. They provide the guidance to cover the runtime rule sets. And then those runtime rule sets get implemented during the solution delivery lifecycle. So this is a nutshell, in a nutshell, the responsibilities from the stakeholder perspective. I will not go through this slide too much. Next slide. This is only showing you that entitlement engagement process. First one is evaluation phase is business driven, design phase is more architecture driven, and the right hand side is more project driven. The one calling out I would like to do here is that you really need to generate the graphical and textual profile, so that during the profile generation, the project team and the business owner can understand the entitlement rights of each profile. The next slide is about, this is about a consistent and agreed enterprise governance terms. This is also quite critical. Before you start to do anything within your organization, you need to make a decision about those enterprise governance terms. There is no one right answer or there's no wrong answer, but the important thing is a consistency and agreement among all stakeholders. This is based on TOGAF. It's been a little bit changed and refined. You can use as an example, or you can start your own one. But also what is important, you have to call out which ones are binding and which ones are non-binding. This is also from an entitlement perspective is quite important. Once you agree those governance terms, and you also need to make sure that your policies are you know, having policy characteristics as you defined, and your principles, your standards are the same. This hierarchical navigation from regulation, policies, principles to standards is quite important. This traceability, look at from GDPR, or now we have SPR, I believe, here in Australia recently surfaced itself, is important not only for regulatory perspective, also for the organization to make sure that your standards are coming from certain policies or certain principles. It's attached, whether internal or external regulations, so that you have this navigation. Again, it doesn't mean that if you have multiple regulations like GDPR, Code of Conduct, or whatever it is, you will just have one policy within one section, but you might have multiple principles, and you might have multiple standards. As long as you have that traceability, then you know why you have those standards, and you will be able to answer the questions regarding that principle or standard. And actually that sort of traceability and agreement also reduces the number of discussions and negotiations and arguments within the project or even outside of the project. This is basically, this slide is basically talking about defining the actor's role. We are a little bit behind the time. I'm going a little bit fast. But basically, to define the actor's role, you need to use a reference architecture you developed, and you will have an entitlement template. Hopefully, this will be also within your metadata repository. And then you will just create the profile to establish the profile usage and also the outcome, whether logical or physical restrictions, and also data processing restrictions. Basically, once you create your actor's profile, you have the data rights and obligations, you have the permissions to data that an actor controls, you have the data processing permissions, you have the access control, as well as physical and collocation restrictions. And also one thing you should just keep in mind, that not every profile outcome here listed is applicable to every actor. So depending on actor, whether your actor is an organization or application, you will have those various entitlements on the right-hand side. We mentioned previously primary and secondary actor concept. The primary actors are quite important because you need to define, actually, sorry, we maybe also need to mention what is an entitlement. We discussed this one previously, but entitlement block is rights and conditions and obligations. You just define, we collectively refer to this one as an entitlement. And you need to define the root entitlement for the primary actors first, before you just getting into any solution delivery mood within the projects. So primary actor, if the actor is an organization, your primary actor is your group organization. Give the access to your secondary actors, basically your subsidiaries or service providers or whoever. If your primary actor is an application or system, then you need to first define the primary actors' roles for the system of records, because for application and systems, system of records are your starting point. And if your actor is roles or person, then you need to start first defining the data owners, what their root entitlement block is. Then everything starts with the data owners based on which business objects they own. Everything starts from that root entitlement. When it comes to the secondary actors, these are the actors, they get the entitlements from the primary actors, and secondary actors may have different levels of access or different levels of rights. But also we have to keep in mind that secondary actors cannot transfer any access right to other actors. And if our actor is an application, we need to keep in mind that applications might be sometimes primary actor from some business objects perspective, and they might be a secondary actor for other business objects. So same application might just rule or play primary or secondary actor role depending on which business objects it's holding the rights for. So this is sort of introduction to the concept. And the next one is creating the initial seed and the root entitlement for primary actors. Everything comes from your policies and translated to the rule set. And based on your reference architecture, you will come up with the initialized privileges or personalized privileges, sorry, and transferable and received privileges. And then you define the root entitlement for primary actors. Then once you define the rules for the root entitlements for the primary actors, you are ready for the projects. Take these ones as an input, and then with the introduction of the new applications, new solutions, they might also just define the root entitlements for the secondary actors, or also they might just come up with a new primary actor if there's a new business object or introduced to the organization because they acquired a new business or from a third party, etc. The next slide is about the integration. Actually, our ultimate aim is seamless integration and automate where possible. This automation is most important for the runtime rules. We would like to, the left top corner is actually revealing itself is to a little bit self-automation, half automation, I would say, because this requires discussions, workshops, etc. But you have to be able to hold the information in a metadata repository, some repository, and which is mainly the metadata repository. But also our aim is being able to create some runtime scripts and being able to execute those scripts automatically in information and access management or rules and engine environments. That is also sort of the ultimate aim. But I would say, based on my experience, this is our sort of weakest link in the success of entitlement management. Okay, the last slide is about the success factors. The very first thing is significant involvement of data governance forum. As I mentioned, this is not an oversight. It is basically they have to be part of and execute the program of work for entitlement management together with the information architects. Second factor is true collaboration among those three functions: legal office, data governance forum, and enterprise architecture team. Without that true collaboration, I don't think we can go too far, because when you look at the legal documents are so wordy, so complex, they need to spare the time, understand where the data aspect, and they also need to help the forum as well as the enterprise architecture teams. The third one is data savvy business with full support. This is also quite important because there will be some discussions, some arguments, and there will be some escalations, and we need definitely business full support, business support. And also, to be able to execute the program of work, you need to have budget, and so funding support will be essential, and their participation when required is essential. The last part is vendor partnership. This is also quite critical to achieve automation, visualization, and ease of maintenance. unfortunately, the existing vendor products are yet to be matured in that space. Based on my experience, the metadata repositories are good to hold the information around the business objects, the data owners, or linking them to the applications, or even being able to trace from the policies to standards, script principles, guidelines, etc. But when it comes to creating the link from the metadata repository and automatically generating the executable scripts and sending automatically to IAM systems or to rules engine part, it's quite not matured yet. But also I should admit that I haven't looked at the vendor space last 6 months closely. My experience is based on mainly Informatica and Accent use. Again, I think we need to watch for this space. Okay, this concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer now. I think we have 3 questions, but also again, if you have any questions later or you would like to discuss, you can just directly contact me through LinkedIn. Over to you, Warren.
Thanks, Nur. Thank you for a very interesting presentation on entitlement management and looking at the various aspects that are involved in enforcing, resolving, revoking access, fine-grained entitlements, authorizations, privileges, and so on and so forth. So there were a few questions which came up. First question is from David. David is asking, assessing the results of someone's entitlement seems quite complicated, and the report could be quite detailed. How can one recognize when an entitlement appears to be in error, like giving too much entitlement?
Too much entitlement, this is why we're just talking about is the importance of the metadata management or metadata repository. The idea is, first of all, once you define your primary actors and their entitlements, we just want that access rights to be captured automatically as soon as they give that access within the metadata management. But again, if someone abuses their own entitlements or information rights, you can't just stop, but maybe you can reverse checking or controlling. You can just put some controls in place. But that's also for us is important, having this access logs, so that you need to do some intelligent search in access logs. You can just bring maybe some controls in place by checking those access logs, which also captured within the metadata repository. So this is my answer. But again, at least when you just look at the entitlement management end-to-end process, you should be able to have that trace, and that linkage should not be broken based on automation and controls you put in place.
Thanks, Nur. The next question comes from Liz. So what is a graphical profile?
Graphical profile, if you just when you look at the entitlement reference architecture, you might just say that is the graphical profile. You just highlight there, you will say my actor is an application, and let's give one ERP, some sort of an ERP system or customer relationship management application. And then you highlight within your actor all access rights. Okay, which business objects it has access. So you highlighting in a graphical sense what sort of parameters it's impacting this actor. And then once you get into that parameter, then it just takes you to the next level, and it shows in the in a graphical form which business objects you are the owner, or system of record, which business objects you are, system of engagement, and then also it just tells where you can just locate that information. So you starting with that reference architecture, that's the graphical sort of outcome, and then you just going layer by layer.
Okay, thanks for that. The next question is from Melik.
Yeah.
Are there any legislation/regulations that forces organizations to establish a formal data governance forum?
The most for Australia, it doesn't. I don't think there's any legislation or regulation forces you, but there's a strong recommendation from APRA that you need to have a governance body, but it doesn't give you actually the mandate how it should be done, where it should be placed, or what their responsibility is. But when you look at from the GDPR perspective, which is quite important for European organizations, or any organization wants to work in Europe, they don't call it data governance forum, but they definitely want you to have a data protection office. And they expect you to have that data protection office to answer all your data related questions, and they are accountable for. So that GDPR regulation mandates the data protection office, but from Australia based organizations, I don't think that is a must, but strong recommendation.
Okay. Thanks for that. And of course, without data governance, you become inefficient. And over a period of time, your processes and the accountabilities, they cannot be tracked. So your data, over a period of time, there will be leakage, there will be mismanagement. The next question comes from Kiran. Thanks for your talk, Nur. Very thought-provoking. I was wondering if you have assisted a small to medium-sized organization who may be low on the data maturity scale to become GDPR compliant. If so, do you have any tips? Thank you.
Actually, from the GDPR perspective, my last experience or my last assignment is in a large organization in Europe, an insurance organization in Europe. Again, I think I try to distill my tips in this presentation. The very first thing you really need to do, because we were just trying to sort of operationalize the MDM for customer in the organization. And you will not believe that, but it took almost more than 7-8 months to discuss what sort of information MDM can hold, active customers, not active customers, personal identifiable data, not personal identifiable data, for subsidiaries, what sort of access they can have, they can't have, whether you can do your MDM future-proofing or not future-proofing. So all these discussions, and that's actually pushed us to come up with this entitlement management proposal. My very first tip is rationalize your data policies and internal policies, and make sure that they are linked back to or traced back to some legislation or regulation or code of conduct or whatever it is. Also, you might have some strategy or trace back to that strategy, so you have a ground which you just can say that I'm putting those principles or standards in place because of that, because it will just help you to put your arguments forward and before the project kicks in. And also we identify like multiple policies within the organization. That is also important. I know quite a number of organizations came up with those data policies, and they actually don't have teeth, basically. You need to rationalize and make sure that those rationalized policies are approved and agreed by the data governance forum. But also sometimes that's also one of the tip, is not enough. If your data governance forum doesn't have teeth, then you really need to make sure that you identify the pecking order of all those executive forums, and then you got the approval from the highest board. In my case, that one was the group executive board. So we also had that discussion regarding where your governance forum is placed and who makes the final call. So you know that everyone else will agree to move forward, and there will be no further discussions. So that's the setting up activities, basically, or foundational activities are quite important before you put that entitlement management into your change lifecycle process.
Thanks, Noor. One last question from Nick. So Nick is asking, does having comprehensive crude models help with entitlement management? If these models are missing, could entitlement management promote model development?
Okay, when you just talk about models, I'm hoping that we're just talking about basically business objects. It's good to have sort of a conceptual data model of an organization, but I think it's time to not to emphasize the the modeling aspects of it. So that's why I refrain my language from the modeling, because when you start to talk about modeling, usually you're just losing a little bit the business side. But if you just talk about the logically related objects, the business objects, and if you express yourself in business terms or business functions, then you are much more successful. And once you define your business objects and decide the leveling, if that is essential, then your model also will be successful at the end anyway. So this is a little bit, has two sides. Definitely, but if you have as an organization good model fully defining your business functions, definitely it will be a great help. But if you don't have that, in the absence of that, you really need to work together with the data governance forum representatives and then create these business objects and work hand to hand, and then you can just update your model, or your model can be an input to that as well.
So Noor, on that, I think what they're also asking is, how do you translate these models into something which can be, encoded as rules or something, so that you have create, read, update, and delete the functionalities in the database.
That the most important, that's why I was just talking about the mapping. First, once you put your leveling and define your business objects, you need to map them to data owners, so you know which data owners on which objects, but also you have to map your business objects to your applications. And once you map your business objects to applications, you also need to call it out. This application for this business object is a system of record or system of reference or whatever it is. So you have to have that full mapping before you progress, because once you have that mapping, then you can also identify which data owner can have access or can give access to which application.
Okay, thank you so much, Noor. I don't have any other questions which have been posted. So thank you, Noor, for taking your time and explaining entitlement framework to everyone. And thanks everyone for attending, and see you in the next event. Thank you.
Thanks, Varun, and thanks, Dama, for the opportunity. Good evening.
You're most welcome.